Okay. Broadcasting to you live from the back of a DeLorean going 88 miles per hour through an undisclosed location in the American Southwest. It's the night shift with our Project Gravitar special, very special episode. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. It's so great to have you. Very excited for today's show. How's our audio? Can everybody hear us okay? I'm looking at the chat. Shout out to Chris and Brett, our mods in the chat. And a special shout out to Xander Jones, who is flying shotgun today, producing the live stream. We're doing something a little different today. We're trying a sort of a new approach. So Xander's going to be in the background, kind of making things happen and making sure everything flies smoothly. And we've got a really, really cool guest for you today. I'm super, super excited for this show. It's going to be a big year for UFO media. There's going to be a lot of stuff coming. I know that the new James Fox documentary, The Program, is coming soon. Steven Spielberg's working on a new project. But probably the most anticipated project in this community is Project Gravitar. And this is a project that goes above and beyond what a normal documentary would be. And it expands into some really, really cool areas. And we're going to get into it today. We're going to look at some footage. We're going to look at some images from the project, but it's so much more than just a documentary. And it tells the story of Bob Lazar and his time at Area 51 or S4, working on the reverse engineering program. And we're going to get a very unique look inside the facility and the places and spaces that Bob worked. And it's going to be fascinating. So I'm really excited to share that with you today. Before we get started, just some quick updates for the people watching at home. If you want to go to our Discord, you can do that there's a link in the show notes. Our mods will be putting that link up in the chat as well. You can find it there, or you can go to teamnightshift.com and there should be a link right there for Discord. You can click that and it'll take you right to our Discord server. And in that Discord server, we have a channel set up just for people to ask questions for today's show. We're going to do audience questions towards the end. So if you have questions you want to ask, or if you think of something while we're talking and you just want to throw it in there, please do so. We'll make sure that we do our best to work it into the show in the time that we have. Okay. I think before we get started with our guest, I'm going to go ahead and show you the trailer for Project Gravitar. If you're not familiar with this, it's a 3-part project. We're going to look at the trailer for the documentary, and this is up on their website, projectgravitar.com. Xander, do you have that pulled up?
There's really no way I can prove it without revealing my identity and getting myself into more trouble than I have already.
Exactly what's going on up there?
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs that are out there of extraterrestrial origin, and they're basically being dismantled. Some are, well, in various stages of completion, built from other parts, and they're being test flown and basically just analyzed.
I was 29 years old, working on the most incredible project in the history of the world. No one has ever been able to show exactly what I saw with my own eyes, until now. Let's travel back in time to December of 1988 when this all started.
Unbelievable. I have goosebumps every time I watch that. It's so good. It's so good. I'm so excited for this project. You have no idea. So our guest today is Luigi Vendittelli. He's the director and the creative visionary behind this project. He is overseeing this, the team putting this together, the amazing team of very talented artists and professionals who are doing this. He's got an unbelievable amount of stuff to show us today, so it's going to be really exciting. I'm going to read his bio just so you know a little bit about Luigi, and then we'll bring him on. Luigi Vendittelli is an important figure in the UFO research. Hailing from Canada, he began his journey into ufology at a young age, becoming the world's youngest member of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, in 1988. Over time, he rose through the ranks to become the national director of MUFON Canada. After several years heading up the operation, he eventually left MUFON to pursue an initiative called We Are Not Alone, WANA, which focused on creating awareness and providing support for individuals who have experienced UFO sightings or alien abductions. Luigi has been involved in several high-profile projects and more recently has been working in collaboration with legendary whistleblower Bob Lazar on Project Gravitar. Project Gravitar involves creating a documentary, a virtual reality experience, and a beautifully illustrated coffee table book, all based on Lazar's experiences at Area S4, a facility just south of Area 51 at the Papoose Lake Dry Bed, or Papoose Dry Lake Bed. Through Project Gravitar, Luigi is also trying to emphasize the importance of presenting such extraordinary accounts with accuracy and compassion, despite the profound implications it may have for us as a species and the true reality of the human experience. Luigi's work is often characterized by a broader philosophy of empathy, supporting those who have had unexplained experiences and advocating for a more respectful understanding of these phenomena. Luigi, thank you so much for taking time to be here today. It's great to have you. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.
I have to ask you, and I know everyone at home wants to know, how does the DeLorean handle? What was it like driving it? And did you go to 88 miles per hour?
So yeah, the DeLorean is not what a lot of people think it is. It's beautiful. It's a kick-ass looking car, but it really sucks. Like it's basically a slow, heavy clunker that just you got to really know how to use because it's going to break on you if you don't use it properly. It's a extremely old car as well, so you got to consider the age it has, but we didn't bring it up to 88, although we make it look like we did, but if it did go up to 88, it would probably take 88 minutes to get.
It's that bad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it must have been a dream come true to ride around in one.
Probably some of the best memories of our lives with that experience. I mean, I got a chance to spend 2 days in the desert with Bob Lazar driving around in the DeLorean. So I don't think I could ever top that. That was really fun. We had a blast out there. We spent a lot of time cleaning the car because it's extremely dusty and there's a lot of dust powder in the desert. So the car was constantly covered with dust. So we must have cleaned the car at least 100 times while we were out there, but it was great. It was really cool.
A lot of fun. Is Bob going to help you mod one up? You were telling us before the show you're thinking about getting one.
One of the things is, we were talking earlier, is that basically one of the things I'd like to do is once I get this done and I could take a break. It's been 3 years. I want to take a little bit of a break from constant work every single day. Is probably getting myself a DeLorean time machine, either building one or buying one that's already modded. But then I even had a conversation with Bob about this, and he was all in, basically saying, hey, why don't we get one and then turn it into an electric version and make it more comfortable and make it actually performant, like a performing car, get a better suspension on it, so
that's your next documentary.
That would be awesome. Yeah. That'd be a really cool
Bob's garage.
Yeah.
Just going about tooling around. Can you imagine how amazing would that be to spend a month or two or a couple of months just tooling around in the garage with Bob Lazar and a DeLorean?
we talked about it, and he was like, "Yeah, that would be a good idea." I said, "Yeah, wouldn't it? I mean, building a time machine together, that would be pretty cool."
He's the real Doc Brown.
Yeah,
He's it.
yeah, he really is. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so excited to talk to you today. This is so fantastic. I have been watching this project from the sidelines for a few years now. As you said, it's been about 3 years, and it's one of those interesting projects that sort of surfaces and then it kind of recedes for a while, and then you hear about it again, and then but there's so much buzz about it. Can you, just to start us off a little bit, can you tell us what's the 30,000 foot view of Project Gravitar, and how did you start on this project?
Well, Project Gravitar, it started in 2021. I had an idea back in 2021 where I wanted to do something. I had been involved in the community for a long, long time. I was also at MUFON for a long time. And I took a big step back from that. I didn't need to be part of the daily investigations. I kind of got, to be honest, I got a little bored with it because it's a lot of the same thing over and over. It's obviously compelling stuff, but once you've seen it every single day, you kind of know that, yeah, there's something out there. We just can't seem to catch it, or, and we can't seem to put a brand on it. We don't know exactly what it is. So I took a step away from that, and I founded We Are Not Alone, which is the WANA movement. And it was a lot because of the work I had done also with one of the witnesses of the Ariel school incident back in 1994, and about how extremely important this topic is. More than just nuts and bolts. A lot of people have had very profound experiences regarding this stuff. So it goes a little further. And when I was looking at all this, one of the things I had noticed is there is nothing other than, I guess, cheesy stuff. When you go in a store, you want to buy anything regarding UFOs or aliens, it's always kind of cheesy. It's never really like a professional thing, unless it's a sci-fi movie piece. So if you want to buy the Millennium Falcon, you could get some really amazing models of them, but you'll never find something superb when it comes to a real case. So other than, let's say, artistic renditions of them, so an artist that makes very little quantities because they do them by hand. So I wanted to create a flying saucer. I wanted to come up with a very high quality model of a flying saucer made out of die cast. I spent, other than, by the way, 30 some years in the field, but I've also spent 25 years of my life in merchandising and making stuff. And so I'm very familiar on how to make things. And I wanted to make flying saucer out of die cast and make it really like a collector edition. And I thought, which one would I do? Like, what model would I choose? And it ended up, I said, well, the only person we know that would know more details about it, not just somebody who was abducted and was inside of one, but somebody who apparently worked on it and dismantled it, was Bob Lazar. So I took a chance and prepped something internally, reached out to United Nuclear, where he's his company, him and his wife run United Nuclear, and called and got on the phone with somebody, with Zach, that was working there. And I said, look, you guys don't know me. This is my website. This is my company website. This is who I am. This is what I've been doing for 25 years. I'd like to make a professional diecast model of the sport model flying saucer that Bob worked on. There's a lot of information online. I'm sure we could do this on our own, but I'm sure it would be a lot better if we worked with Bob. It would be an honor to have him help us design it or give us all the specs, and then would be so much more valuable if it was an official product, something that was developed in collaboration with Bob Lazar. And so Zach said, I don't know, I'll let you know, I'll bring it up to Bob and see if he's interested. So I think it was a day or two later, that Zach called me back and he says, well, Bob checked you out and he's interested. He's going to talk to you if you want to have a conversation. So I said, I'd love to have a conversation. So got on the phone with Bob. He interviewed me the first time. He was basically asking me, if you did this, how would you do this? And I went into some very technical talk with him and how I would use the materials and how I would blend materials together, moldings and all that. And I think he stopped me. He goes, I could see, you know, what you're talking about.
Mm.
And I said, trust me, I've been doing this for a long time. And so he says, well, all right. He goes, let's do it. You can come and see me and we'll sit down and we'll talk about that. So I got to meet him at the end of 2021. I went out in Oregon where he lives, and the whole project started from there. It was about developing a flying saucer model, and I took it to the next level because I was really, really impressed with the details Bob had provided me. I was very impressed with him, having met him and sat down with him for a couple of days in private and going over the details. I was beyond thankful for his time. He was graciously providing us all this, you know, this for free. This basically, here's all the information. Now I had promised him, I said, one thing I will promise you is that we will do everything according to what you tell us. We're not going to change anything. We're not going to modify anything. No matter how difficult the task is, we will make it exactly like this. Keep in mind that he was explaining a real thing that he saw. And we had to recreate it as a model that you could take apart. So I had to come up with concepts in my mind of how do I basically recreate the flying saucer the same way he saw it, but in a, if you want to call it a human production, like it's because there's a lot of things about that craft that we just can't do today. Or we could do today, but we can only do it with very expensive 3D machinery that we don't usually have access to. So
are you talking about making a physical model, like in terms of production technology?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Because you have to keep in mind, like, I don't want to have a closed object. I wanted somebody to be able to open it up and see what it looked like. Obviously he was inside one. So the more interesting part to me is what's inside a flying saucer, right? So if we've all seen pictures, we've all seen diagrams, but looking at an object from an exterior point of view is very exciting. Looking at it from an interior point of view, from somebody who has first-hand experience in it, is really interesting, because that's what I think made it so interesting. Is you have somebody who allegedly worked on this thing, you know, and took it apart and was able to give us, at least from his memory, dimensions based on, you know, what we could figure out of, you know, how far was it, how big was this, and so it was absolutely interesting to do all that. And it grew. It became a project that was way more exciting than we thought at the beginning. We were going to make a model. Then we came back to Montreal. We started building it in a 3D environment. And then from that point, we thought, okay, if we make this model, we're going to put it in a box, right? Obviously, it's got to be packaged. Why don't we make the box look like the hangar? You know, we could print the interior of the hangar in this box. And then I thought, okay, I got to ask Bob what that. And so we started asking him all those questions. That pushed me to go back to see him. And on the second trip, I already had a 374-page book on the craft from my team and I. We built a huge book on every possible detail that there was to build this thing.
This is the stuff that you had learned from Bob as you were kind of talking to him?
Yeah, there was a lot of information that I had previously that I had done. We had done a lot of research online, by the way. And to make a little side point on this, a lot of information online was absolutely inaccurate, which was not inaccurate when I presented it to Bob. It was a lot of very different information from different data sources online. So some people would say one thing, another site would say another thing. There's a lot of websites out there that talk about Bob Lazar and what he had talked about in 1989. So there's a tremendous following of the story, but unfortunately it got fragmented and it got broken up. And I think what happened is, voluntarily or not on purpose, the information got lost in translation. and it basically became very inaccurate. So whenever I would find something, I would write it down. And the second time I went out there, I had this big book that I brought with me. And then I had a second book. I don't have it, unfortunately, I don't have it here with me, but we called it, it was a big binder in the office called Questions for Bob. It was like this big red binder that we wrote Questions for Bob. So every single time either myself or a team member had a question, we would write it in there, say, hey, next time we talk to Bob, we got to ask him this, you know. And so we had 178 questions for Bob when I went back there the second time. And Bob sits there and he goes, okay, well, let's do it. Let's go through this. And every single thing we went through, and he had an answer really fast. Like, no, that's inaccurate. That's like that. And no, no. And then some things he couldn't remember. So there was a few things that I could completely understand. You know, I would ask him things that were impossible. I don't think anybody would have been able to pick up, because when you're building something, the smallest details count.
Yeah.
And if I asked you something about your car that you use every day, but it's something that you don't pay attention to all the time in your car, and you might go, I don't know, that's normal. It doesn't mean that you were never in your car every day. So there was things that he couldn't remember. And I said, oh, okay. So, you know, we had a lot of questions that we could, like out of the 178, I think there was maybe 12, 13 questions he couldn't remember. And these were minute little details of how long do you think that was, or how wide, and very impossible to tell because of how dark it was in there. So I came back with all the answers, and we made a whole correction to the craft and started building the hangar. When this happened, we looked at the technology that we were using, and this is in 3D, and we thought, this is crazy. What we could do here is really incredible. And I think that if we go further into this and we open the budgets about this, we could really build this entire facility and turn this into an experience for people. Not only will it be a model, but I think we can actually have something that's a lot more interesting. So it went from model to a potential VR experience, like an experience where people could go and visit S4. And so I called Bob and I said, what do you think if we went further? What if we went really deeper into this project? And I wanted to build the entire S4 facility, the entire landscape around it, Papoose Lake, all the way to Groom Lake, and so that we could recreate the environment. He says, you really want to do that? I said, I would be in charge of it, because obviously it's our budget. We would want to do this. We would be so honored to have you help and at least give us information on S4. And that's how it all kind of hit like another level. So when Bob said, yes, if you're willing to do it, let's do it, we started building S4 in a 3D environment. And that project, that level, that we up the level, if you want to call it, lasted months. We started, getting a lot of information, a lot of Zoom calls with Bob. I hired a lot more, 3D artists and technical guys in there to really help us out in building the entire facility, which we did. And once we had it to a point where it was the whole S4 base, we had only had built the sport model at the time, so we had not built the other crafts that he had witnessed there. We had the sport model and the entire base. That's when, while we were doing this, that's when I said, this happened in 88 and 89. We really want to bring this back to, we want to bring the people back to that era. And I was on my computer and I see a post on my Facebook of a company that rents the DeLorean time machine. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Anybody who's from the 80s, could totally relate to the DeLorean time machine. It's an iconic vehicle of that era, of that decade. So I thought, oh, that's cool. So I reached out and I said, how much would it be? And they said, well, you're in Montreal. It was an exorbitant amount of money to bring it in Montreal. And I said, okay, no. And And then I thought New York, and then I thought, why would I do anything in New York with that? It doesn't apply to Bob's story. And the reason I forgot to mention, the reason why this came up is I thought, what if we used the time machine to bring people back to 1988? And so I asked the person who was in communication, who was the owner of the company. I said, would you have one in Las Vegas? And he says, yeah, actually we do. The best car we have is in Las Vegas. And so from that, we basically said, okay. I said, if it's in Las Vegas, could we take it out to the desert? He says, that's going to cost you money. I said, well, could we do that? Is it something we could do? Yeah, you can't drive the car though, but you could bring it out to the desert. We're like, okay, it's cool. That's a good. That will still do something like that. Could I change the license plate on it? I said, yeah, you could do whatever. If you rent it, you can put whatever you want on it. Okay. So I said, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this guy, but we're working with a guy from, used to work out at Area 51 called Bob Lazar. He worked on flying saucers. And so the guy answers me by email and he says, well, he goes, I'm an aerospace engineer and I actually worked at Groom Lake for many years. I was like, you're kidding me. This is the owner
Wow.
of the whole company in the US who runs all these this business for the DeLorean time machine. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. He goes, no, I worked out there at Groom Lake. I know Bob Lazar. I know the guys I worked with. We all believed in Bob Lazar. We all know that is for sure something that happened. And I'm like, what are the chances that I'm talking to somebody who worked at at Area 51? So, and we thought this is like, we got to do this. I mean, this is just too cool. So I get on the phone with Bob that night and I said, look, we have an idea. We want to rent a DeLorean time machine. We want to bring you out to the desert outside of Area 51 with the car. We want to do a shoot out there and we want to bring everybody back to 1988 so that we could present this project. And he continues and says, and you want me to say, I'm Bob Lazar, and let me take you back to 1988? I said, yeah, would you do it? He goes, let's do it. So, so it ended up being like this completely, this whole concept came in in an afternoon, and we did it. We went out there,
Wow.
got the car, brought it out on the dry lake bed in the middle of the desert in Nevada, not too far from Area 51. We rented a big motor home. We had our whole crew go out there. And then while we were out there, the guy who owned the car was there, obviously with us. And he was worried, you can't drive the car. And once he got to see who Bob Lazar was, because he didn't even know who Bob was, by the way.
Oh, he didn't know.
He didn't know who Bob was.
Oh.
Yeah. So I had told him, I said, you got to look into because the owner of the car was not the guy who runs the DeLorean rental company.
Got it.
The car there's somebody who actually owns the vehicle. And once he got to see the Joe Rogan episode just before we got there, so he finally knew who Bob Lazar was, came out in the dry lake, gets to meet Bob, and he comes up to me, he goes, that's a pretty cool guy, and I'm like, yeah, that's Bob Lazar. He goes, yeah, I checked him out. He's a pretty famous guy. I'm like, yeah. I go, could you please let us drive the car? He's like, he goes, you could drive, you could take it and drive it a few meters and you could film that, And I was like, all right. So Bob gets into the car and we film a couple of scenes of him just going at like freaking 10 miles an hour, past the camera just to have a few shots. And then we just look at him. We're all there in the desert. And I just look at the guy and I go, can we drive the car? And he looks at me, he goes, all right, kick it. So I'm like, really? He's like, nice. Go ahead, kick it. And if he's listening, his name is Chris. Chris, I still apologize for what we did because we abused that car for those 2 days like no one's ever abused a DeLorean time machine. I guarantee you Marty McFly never did that. Never. There's no way they did what we did. That was like a absolute crazy experience. And we pushed that car to its limits for 2 full days. We paid him a whole bunch of money to clean the car after. I mean, we made a deal with him to, to make it right. And a couple months later, he sends me a video on his phone going, I'm still getting sand out of this thing. And he's still got sand in the car. So but it's forever recorded. So
it wanted to be driven. It needed that. You gave it exactly what it needed. Every brand needs to be.
And so that shoot basically was the precursor to our movie, because that's when we all at the dry lake all together, including Bob, we all said, this has got to be more than just a VR experience. This has got to be more than just a model. We got to make a story here about S4, and we got to make it into a documentary film.
That's interesting, because I thought so that was a teaser, almost like a for the other stuff. I thought for some reason you had the documentary already well underway by the time you put that out. It's the other way around.
Yeah, no. We actually created that teaser when we had made that decision to make the documentary.
Wow.
But when we recorded, we were not 100% sure how we were going to go about and use this, because it was going to be used to promote potentially a VR experience. And
so in the process of trying to make this highly detailed, accurate recreation of the sport model,
right? You
hook up with Bob Lazar and get so much firsthand detailed information that you wind up with a book.
That's right.
And a VR experience that you used to start designing this, and it just blew up into this much larger project.
Exactly.
So this would be the most accurate way that someone can understand what it is that Bob is talking about. There is.
Oh, there's just no way you could make it more clear than this unless you see the real thing. Okay. So the way we built this is, I mean, obviously, like, this is state of the art stuff. Like, we didn't go into this with small budgets. I can tell you that for sure. This is a very high budget production that we decided to do. And this was all on myself and my team, who made a decision to go ahead and invest in this. One of the reasons why this was also done is because never has anything like this been done. So when you consider the enormous amounts of interesting cases out there related to this topic, there's a lot of great work that's been done. There's amazing documentaries, great storytellers out there, but visually it's always difficult to see something that is representative of what was experienced. So we've had a lot of things happen over the decades. I mean, the story of Travis Walton was turned into a Hollywood movie that was done, but it wasn't done accurately to the story. There's a lot of things that make absolutely no sense to the story. It doesn't look like what it actually was. When you look at rendition or TV shows of the Roswell crash, we've got there's a tremendous amount of stuff that's been done, but never accurately depicted. So you see the accuracy, but there's also a lot of limitation because they didn't have the budgets, they didn't have the materials to do it, and the technology wasn't there at the time as well. What we've used, this technology is essentially brand new. So when we began doing this, we started using 3D technology that was also in the beginning stages. So the last 3 years, not only has the project evolved, but the technology evolved, allowing our project to become what it has become. So you have a completely intangible environment. It's totally virtual. It looks 100% real. You can have photography, videography, cinematography. You can do anything you want. It has real physics in it. I mean, mind you, I
think we've got some media that we can show, right?
Sure,
Xander, do you have? Well, while you walk us through this, Xander's going to pull up some stills, and it looks real. It looks photorealistic.
That was the whole point of our project was to really bring photorealism to this story. So you've got a landscape there that was created 100% through our team. This is fully taking into account the actual geographical data and the topology of that environment right next to Papoose Lake, the type of foliage that's out there, the hillside, the exact way the hangar doors looked like. Everything was designed from the ground up in a 3D environment. So everything you look at, everything you see is completely 3D. So it's basically
I thought that was a photograph. I honestly thought that was a real photo.
There's a lot of work that goes into that to make something look like that in a cinematography environment, where that still to a lot of people is just a still, right? But if you wanted, if you'll, whoever is going to get to see our film, you will actually see the camera going in. It's a real place. So you can actually go in, and it's a fully three-dimensional environment. So it's not.
Can you walk all the way around the craft? And
oh, absolutely. You could walk around it. You could go inside of it. Go open the door. Go into the hallways of the facility. You could when you're going to have the VR experience, you'll be able to pick stuff up, put things together, turn lights off. You'll be able to move the ladder if you want. You know, it's basically.
Can you turn on the sport model? Can you switch it on?
You can, yeah. If you know how to do it. If you watch the documentary is going to be very comprehensive. It's going to be a very detailed description of everything that Bob experienced out there. So one of those things is he will explain how he witnessed the reactor being put together. So how him, Barry, in this lab, his lab partner was called Barry Castillo. They were in this propulsion lab, and how he was moving things around, and how they were putting the element 115 inside the reactor, putting the cap on it, putting the hemisphere, rotating the emitter, basically turning this thing on. If you follow and watch our film, you will, for the first time, really see. You'll get a visual of exactly what Bob Lazar was talking about 35 years ago. Now, once you got that, couple months after that, you'll be able to go into our 3D experience, or virtual reality experience, that will follow our film. And at that point, if you remember what you saw in our film, you'll be able to put all that together, go inside the craft, do exactly what you got to do, and it'll essentially turn on the craft.
Wow. That is so cool. You make a great point about ufology in general, and the sort of transition from the late 80s and 90s into this sort of current era that we're in. And Bob Lazar is kind of the starting point, wouldn't you say, for the modern era of ufology? He is where most of the people who are learning about it today are starting with Bob's story and branching out from there. And it seems like there's been a real difficulty in getting that story accurately reproduced. And I understand that he had opportunities to make movies in the past, but he's passed them up. Is that your understanding?
It's very interesting, and this is something that I really I cannot emphasize enough. Bob was very willing to help us, but also very much concerned with making sure that we would not overdo or create things that were not at all part of the story. This is what happened in the past. He had received a very lucrative offer from a production company out in Hollywood to make a movie that he turned down. That's something people should. We don't talk enough about that publicly, where people don't believe Bob Lazar because they say he's trying to take advantage of all this. Well, he could have taken advantage of that when the movie offer came, and he never did. And the reason
was Matt Damon attached to this at one point. In my research, that turned up. Do you know anything about that?
Matt Damon? No, I don't remember hearing Matt Damon in the conversation. But if there was Matt Damon involved, I don't know. I don't want to say I know. All I can say is that they presented the script to Bob, and he looked at it, and they had him running away from government agents, jumping over cars, kind of like a James Bond type of movie. And he said to them, he said, "This is not what I experienced. This has nothing to do with my story." And he says, "I don't want this because this is not what happened." And they were like, "Well, because the story is a little boring." And so he basically said, "Well, the story is boring." And this is something that he would say to us all the time. He would be like, are you guys sure you want to spend all this money? And you know how many times Bob would call me and say, "Hey, Luigi, you sure you want to do this?"
Is it boring though? It's like, like Oppenheimer is the story of a bunch of engineers and physicists.
Boring. Yeah,
that's boring. Sitting around, thinking up what they're going to do. But you watch the film and it's captivating. And to see, and this is like you're talking about the biggest story in human history.
Right. Exactly.
It only happens once, and this man's been inside the craft. I mean, wow. How exciting, like what car chase do you need? What's going to add to that?
I couldn't understand why the movies, the production houses wanted all that. I get the whole concept, but what I don't see is how they missed. I don't understand how they missed the big opportunity, which is what was at S4, right? They wanted him to be running away from agents and all that, which is stupid. But in retrospect, when Bob was telling me all the time, like, why do you want to do this? Like, all I did was I was working on this reactor with Barry. It's boring. It was like stressful, toxic environment. Yes, I went into the craft, but there was nothing that happened. It was quiet. We were under security. So in his mind, he was worried that by us investing into this was likely not going to bring us any benefit because it's such a boring story. And on the opposite side, on my side, I'd turn around and be like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? Like, this is so interesting. This is like, we're recreating the craft. We're recreating the environment. I mean, I don't think it's that boring. I think that in action, let's say, let's not categorize it in the action part of the menu. If you're scrolling through what are we watching tonight, we're not going to go in action, but it's certainly not boring, right?
You could make a 12-part miniseries on HBO about that. Like, you could do so much with a story like this. There's so much drama there, and just the stress and the knowledge that he carries around and walks around with, and trying to go back and live a normal life after something like that. I mean, it's just, it's so amazing, this man's story.
The guy's story, I mean, and we're going to be really highlighting everything that happened at us. Very important note, by the way, is our documentary film is specifically about what happened at S4. Okay. So everything that happened there, from the moment he was sent out his resume to multiple labs while he was living in Las Vegas, to getting interviewed at EG&G Special Projects, where they interviewed him for this job. He was recommended to go there by Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, all the way to taking the Janet, when he got hired, meeting up with his superior, which was Dennis Mariani, getting on a Janet flight, which is the Boeing 737s with the white 737 with a red stripe, flying to Groom Lake, taking a blue bus with blacked out windows, driving 15 miles southwest, arriving at the Papoose dry lake bed, seeing a facility, seeing doors, not a facility, seeing angled large bay doors kind of camouflaged into the side of this hill, going inside this little door on the side that was basically cut into the side of the rock of the mountainside, going in, putting his hand on this contraption that was apparently measuring the bones in his hand, goes into this long corridor, this facility. All this is when he arrives there. everything he experiences throughout the time he was there, the various different visits he had there, the people he interacted with, the information he read in these secret documents that they made him read, the handling of the materials that he was handling inside the propulsion lab, the various tests that were conducted in the propulsion lab with his partner Barry. There was a candle test, a gravity phase test that opened up like this black hole in the lab. There's the components that were allowing him to go inside the craft and actually analyzing the components, the distances and the measurements in there, him seeing this archway that became transparent, and there was like this blue screen that appeared suddenly out of nowhere into this craft. All that, not only are we going to go into really in depth about that, but we're also going to show it to you. So everybody is going to not just hear it from Bob Lazar, because all of this, by the way, is primarily narrated by Bob himself.
Now, you told me in our pre-interview call a really interesting detail about how you handle Bob in the VR experience. Can you talk about that? Can we talk about young Bob?
Yeah. So, well, it's going to be not only VR, it'll be in the film as well, by the way.
Oh.
So, yeah. So there's a technique. We actually wrote our own software for this. So there's Bob was 29 years old when he was out there. So he's a young guy. I mean, it's not the Bob that we see today. Bob that we see today is 65 years old and a completely different person than he was. If I compare to myself, I'm almost 50 to what I was when I was 29. I'm a metamorphosized new version of my 29-year-old version, right?
Sure.
So we had to somehow bring back Bob Lazar also, the younger Bob. And so we created our own de-aging software. We wrote our own software in-house, which is a pretty big deal, by the way.
Wow.
We got a lot of compliments from other producers when we showed them what we were able to do with our in-house tech, because there's not a lot of pictures of Bob Lazar back then. Believe it or not, as incredibly popular as the story became, there was a very limited amount of stuff with him at that time on camera.
Yeah.
So we had to get some good data, good image data, to turn today Bob into young Bob. And so we had him here in Montreal on a green screen. That's today Bob. And basically video like this was super analyzed. We got a 3D full scan of his face, everything, all the features. Then we got a tremendous amount of research went into getting as many old shots as we can of Bob when he was younger. And then we created the software allowed us to place the old version onto the new version and basically recreate a young version of Bob Lazar. So there's going to be a few scenes in the film there. You could see there, that's young Bob. So that face is actually not, and we have it's fully animated. This is just a still of it, but that's Bob when he was 29 years old. So, and that's basically the tech we wrote. It's whatever you see today in, a lot of softwares out there that basically DH people, or you could do a face swap with someone. Mm-hmm. If you pay attention, most of the time it's famous people. Okay. And the reason why is because the softwares require a tremendous amount of reference to be able to provide a sellable recreation of that person. So you need a lot of video or reference images to create quality.
So like a Harrison Ford, you've got 30 years of stuff. Sure.
Exactly. But if you go back and you want to get somebody who hasn't had that, that's a very difficult task.
Right.
Because you're not dealing with the same type of reference. So the amount of work that went behind this was genuinely insane, trying to recreate that Bob Lazar back in 1989 or 88 and 89, which we actually did.
It's so unbelievable the level of detail and work that you've put into this. And I don't think for a lot of younger people, they may not realize that like Area 51 is so baked into our culture now. Yeah. But Bob Lazar is the reason that it is the way that it is. He's the guy that really put that on the map. Prior to Bob, there was no, like, people didn't have any idea about any of this stuff.
I mean, look, I was part of MUFON just before Bob came out. I was actually at MUFON. I was already a member of MUFON at the time. And I remember very clearly that the conversation about the government in being in possession of a craft mostly gravitated around Roswell. That was the main conversation back in the 80s. There was talks that there was a crash in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, and the government collected something. But the main conversation was that a craft crashed in Roswell, and the U.S. Air Force picked up the pieces and hid it away forever, and nobody knew about it. That was the going story and the narrative back then. When Bob came out in 1989, he kind of broke the mold. And he was the first person who came out saying that they have the variety pack. That's actually what he said back then. They had variety pack. They had a variety pack, and they were intact craft. They were not broken pieces. They were not crashed craft. He says, what I saw were fully intact vehicles. So that's something that was not talked about a lot back then. Mm-hmm. He discussed the fact that there was an Area 51, a Groom Lake, which it had been mentioned prior by John Lear in an interview with George Knapp on KLAS. But there wasn't a lot of information on Area 51, and it had not made any real news. It made news, but it wasn't a huge story. When Bob came out, it really went global. It went worldwide. So him announcing that there was a facility out there was the first time the story hit the entire world. The fact that there was a Papoose Lake out there, that was not something that anybody knew about. Nobody was going around going, there's a place called Papoose Lake. Nobody was looking at that. And nobody knew there was a road going out to Papoose Lake. You know, there's a lot of things that were the first time were ever said were from Bob Lazar that nobody's had ever heard of before. The fact that there was the United States Navy that was involved and not the Air Force, that also was something huge. Because Bob said the stamps on the documents were not Air Force, they were U.S. Navy. Right. So that's a big statement back in 1989 when everyone was talking about the Air Force, because it's obviously something that has to do with things that fly. So it's really interesting that all this information came out 35 years ago in a time where none of that information was circulating. And I always say, and you'll probably agree because you have a little bit of white hair like I do here, so you'll know the days before Google. So today's generation doesn't know what we had. So we didn't have Google. We didn't have a quick, hey, grab your phone. Just Google it or check it out, or what is it? Let me validate this. What does Wikipedia say? There was none of that shit back then. All that.
Yeah. You if you were lucky, you had a friend who had like a VHS tape that he could loan you,
right,
of some UFO stuff, or maybe a magazine like Omni
exactly. And the magazine at best would have like a couple of black and white pictures that looked like,
I'll never forget. Do you remember it was the Time Life book series? They had these commercials, and it was like Time Life Mysteries.
Yeah,
I had the whole collection at one time. I don't have it anymore. Oh, they were so cool.
Yeah. I mean, those were the references we had. I remember when I first started at MUFON, I was so excited that there was a magazine, a UFO magazine, the MUFON Journal was to me like, finally, I got something that talks about this. Because I studied astronomy thinking that I would get to UFOs.
Mm.
Okay. And I have so many books from my childhood and when I was in high school. I was a geek, by the way. I wasn't like the cool guy in school, by the way. I was really not.
I don't think anyone watching this show was the cool person in
Yeah,
school.
I was so
You're among
far
friends.
away. I still probably am not the cool guy in school if I do a school reunion. So, and the thing is
You will
that-
be now.
Yeah, I was reading about astronomy, and I really thought, this is how green I was. I really thought if I really up my game in astronomy, I'll eventually get the flying saucers. And never did that happen. There was always a little section at the back of the books that would talk about potential life in the universe, but it was never anything interesting. So when the UFO journal, the MUFON journal got into the mail the first time I got it in '88, I was like, oh my God, finally, I got something. And even that was extremely limited.
It was like, yeah, you would get like just tiny dribs and drabs here and there, and it was such a struggle to get information. And even for somebody like yourself plugged into MUFON,
Yeah.
to stay up to date.
So
I want to ask you, can I interrupt real quick? And just,
Sure,
I'm
sure.
curious about your own, because you have such a long history with the phenomenon and studying it and just being in this world. What's your take on where we're at right now? And do you have like an overall opinion of what is happening? I mean, you've watched this unfold for so many years now. Where are we at today versus where we were 30 years ago? And what's changing? It feels like things are picking up speed. Do you get that sense?
Yeah, I'll say I see it in two different. There's two layers to it in my view. So on the public relations, mainstream, global view, the very positive thing that I see is that finally the subject matter is no longer being ridiculed. Sorry, my phone is So the subject matter is no longer being ridiculed. Okay, so that's something that I consider to be very, very important. I think that finally, if you say UFO or flying saucer or UAP or whatever whatever nomenclature they're giving it, I still say UFO, by the way. This UAP thing to me is completely insane, because it's like they don't want to say what it actually was called for decades. So they want to give it a new name so that it
True.
pulls away from whatever you want to call it. And
I still say UFO.
I say UFO, and when it applies to a circular object that's flying, I call it a flying saucer. Okay, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
So basically, that conversation has been elevated now to a place where you have a lot of people, academics, scientists, scholars, mainstream, everyday people, no longer laughing at it, which is a big step. Okay, so you're at least seeing that, where we had congressional hearings, we have government whistleblowers coming out saying incredible things. You have a lot of people, pilots, that are now describing things, whether they be military pilots or commercial pilots, literally being asked what they saw and not being told not to talk about it. That's a big change in the community or in this field. So that's a big plus. I think that we cannot take that for granted. That's a huge step forward in the acceptability of the phenomenon. Now, that's one side of it. On the other side of it is, what is it actually that they want us to see? Okay, and what exactly do they call what do they define disclosure as being? Okay, and disclosure is such a broad term. There's so many layers to disclosure, because this topic touches on many different levels. So it's not just the disclosure of potential life out there. It's not just disclosure of secret government programs. It's not just disclosure of some type of unknown intelligent entity that is coming into people's bedrooms and taking them at night. This is not, there's so many layers to it. So I find that there is unfortunately some type of coordinated narrative.
It feels that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do you feel like this is being orchestrated? Like, do you I don't want to put you in a weird spot, but
Yeah.
it definitely feels that way. And I'm glad to hear you say that, because it's so choreographed and it's almost like everything is timed. Things like people start saying things in different interviews, but they're all saying the same message. It's consistent.
That's right.
What's your sense of that? What do you think is happening here?
I think there's a level of security that is also part of it. And I have to make a small, how do you say that? Like little, in a parenthesis. In
Sidebar.
Sidebar, yes, sorry. I was going to say it in French, for God's sake. Yeah. So basically, there's a national security component involved in this, no question. Okay? So now, the national security component does not mean it's a threat. That's not the national security component. National security is also a very big term. That also
That's abused, I think. Don't you?
Very, very abused. Absolutely. There's many layers under the national security.
And by the way, I'm sorry, Luigi, if I may, just to interrupt real quick for the audience. If you guys want to ask Luigi questions, if you want to submit an audience question, we'll be doing some audience questions towards the end. Please go into the Discord and go to the general chat. There's an Ask Luigi Vendittelli a question sub thing there. You can go in there and just put in your questions, and we'll make sure that we get to them at the end of the show. Sorry, Luigi, I just wanted to throw that in there because people need to.
Man. That's great. Yeah.
Carry on.
The reality is simple, is that we have to protect the integrity of whatever structure is going on as we speak. So if in the government, if there's a old grandfathered program that has been there for decades, if there are private contractors involved, multiple different companies, an enormous amount of money, I am sure, that has been allocated to these type of black projects, different types of contracts that have been emitted throughout the decades, different types of separate technological breakthroughs that have come out of them, patents that were developed from them. Just what I just said there would require years of research just to decipher all the components, whether they be financial, legal, and technological, to figure out what happened there. Then you have to consider our adversaries. You have to consider, what is China, Russia, North Korea, or any even European adversaries. It doesn't mean if they're allies that they wouldn't want to take what we have. I'm Canadian, you're American. We're on the same team, but let's face it, as much as we're on the same team, America will always be Batman and Canada will always be Robin. And a lot of people are going to get a pretty good laugh out of that from Canada. But anyway, but the reality is that even as friends and allies, one has to be stronger than the other, because that's how humanity works. So if somebody wants to have the technology, if you disclose the fact that you are in possession of some type of hardware that you can't figure out, and you would like to keep, keep in your possession, but have help on, well, your adversary would be like, well, hold on a second. Why do you get to have that and we don't?
Right.
Why? You know what I mean? So it becomes also a very political problem. It becomes a very serious political issue that then goes beyond just technology and are we alone in the universe? So I guess it started on the wrong foot many years ago. I think that there's no question that there's reasons for the secret being kept that were good, and other reasons that were not good. It's complicated. The narrative must exist for a reason. I'd love to have more pieces of the puzzle to understand why. What I don't agree with is, and I will say this publicly, I'll probably get a little bit in trouble for this, but at this point, there's a lot of people out there that get interviewed, very prominent scientists, very respected people that I respect enormously. I won't name names, but I respect, they've been in this field for many years and have done incredible work. But they will never mention Bob Lazar. They will say everything he said, almost verbatim. But they will never say the words Bob Lazar. They will never say, 35 years ago, a gentleman came out and said that he worked at a location called S4, and they had technology that did exactly what we're saying.
Right.
And that, to me, always strikes a chord as there's a reason for this, and it's not because they don't believe Bob Lazar. It's because it's too much of the truth, in my opinion. You're getting too close to something.
Really?
So it's easy to say, if you want to talk about something really controversial, you saw a movie a couple of years ago that was The Sound of Freedom. You know how many platforms they didn't want to, you know how many people didn't want to talk about all those trafficked children? They didn't want to talk about it. But it was real. It was very close to the heart of the truth, but a lot of people didn't want to talk about it. And then suddenly it made it out there. And then the people who didn't want to talk about it were forced to talk about it. I find that if we really want to get to the bottom of something, we have to tackle the most difficult part of the problem. And a lot of times, that's the people that we interact with about the problem. It's not the subject matter. It's the people who get us to the point, to the goal. And I think that there's a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to Bob Lazar. A lot of people don't say they support him publicly. A lot of people don't say his name publicly, and that bothers me a lot.
When you say a lot of people, like, who are you talking about?
That's where I don't want to get into trouble.
Well, not to name names, but like, are you talking about in the media, or are you talking about?
No, not the media. The media. I don't think the media has a problem with the name Bob Lazar. I think what happened, the media will gladly say his name if it serves a purpose. But I think what's happening is that in the community, the people that we see often just talking about the topic, even in very current conversations,
I see.
They're not saying that name.
Right.
But they're saying the exact same things he was saying. So it really makes me question the whole narrative sometimes, because it's like, you want people to know the truth, but you don't want people to know the real truth. There's a
and it seems like what is your take on? Obviously, there's a faction that is pushing disclosure now, and it seems well organized. It seems well staffed. It seems like they go all the way up to Carl Nell, all the way up to Chris Mellon. Are these? What is happening there? Is this a fragmentation of the cover up, or is this a faction that's breaking off for its own reason, or are they actually trying to like have their cake and eat it too, like disclose a little bit, maybe commercialize some of this technology, make money off of it, but still hold on to the?
I don't think we're going to see that. I don't think you're going to see the disclosure of commercializing the technology. I think that's well past beyond our dreams. Okay. Yeah. I think that what we will see, and this is my opinion on this. Now, what I'm going to say is completely my opinion. Okay. Is we've been hearing a lot about metamaterials, about the Galileo project, studying all these things up in the sky, and A.V. Loeb running this project with a lot of brilliant people from Harvard and outside of Harvard, and looking at metamaterials, things that they find. You see Jacques Vallée going around with materials that potentially came off a craft or something like that. You got Gary Nolan. These are all incredibly brilliant people trying to get to the bottom of something. The problem here is that we're still talking about a piece of metal that will give us absolutely nothing except a piece of metal.
Mhm.
Okay. So what happens is the day we are finally told that, yes, this metamaterial is absolutely engineered. It could not have, it is now scientifically confirmed by multiple different labs, and it has been peer-reviewed documents that says this material had to have been engineered, but could not have been engineered by any means on planet Earth or by humans, even in orbit on the ISS example, okay? That would be a very far reach. This is a very safe way of saying we are not alone. That we found something that came off a vehicle that was captured on radar, but we were never able to.
It's like the most basic, simple, low level admission of something without
Correct.
actually committing to anything.
And so we would
Yeah.
have, I believe we're about to step into that realm, okay, which would essentially go and reach a big percentage of mainstream non-interested people in this topic and bring them in and say, oh my God, this is interesting.
Yeah.
They found a piece of metal that is now confirmed by all these labs. And probably following that, you're going to have there's a robot that is on Mars right now that was sent a couple of years ago, actually a few years ago. It's called, my God, I'll try to remember the name while I say this. It's looking for life on Mars. And I don't think we're going to find active live bacteria or anything out there. I think we might find fossilized or some type of old, fossilized bacteria, something that is very, very ancient that proves that life once existed there. Or some type of robot that we send to one of the moons of Saturn, like Triton or something like that, where they'll find that there's water, and in the water they found bacteria, and there is life now outside of the Earth.
And we're hearing the James Webb Space Telescope rumors now about maybe some biosignatures, possibly.
So those are the things that we will see, in my opinion, in the next few decades. That's going to be the main story.
Do you think that's the limit? That's as far as it goes?
Oh, there's no question. I personally, I have no confidence whatsoever that the true program or the true information will come out. I have.
So
no
what do you think is like, what is Carl Nell and David, like, where does all that lead? Does that go nowhere?
It goes nowhere. I mean, it's essentially not something that is that new. Okay. So it's really important to be cautious in how incredibly, people hear it for the first time, because now we've got social media, we've got great platforms like this one that we can talk about. You get a lot more media that you would not have gotten 20 years, even 10 years ago. You know what I mean? So
but essentially what David Grush is saying today is what Bob Lazar was saying.
Correct. That's right.
And Bob said, Bob's actually touched the craft. He's been inside one.
That's right. So
and Grush hasn't even done that. Yeah.
That's the point. So you have a lot of things that are absolute. I always say there are older cases that are far more interesting and far more have better evidential structure to them than the ones that we hear today in Congress. The fact that you have a Navy pilot, which, by the way, I respect tremendously, and I applaud them for having. I actually met Ryan Graves. I think he's an incredible guy. Bob Lazar told me all about David Fravor. Thinks he's an incredible person. Very, very, very amazing people.
Yeah.
There's no question what they saw was real, and it was not normal. It was not something that we should consider as terrestrial technology, unless we have something that, Jesus, I don't know where it comes from, but.
Right.
It's not that they spoke and that we caught it on this type of camera, and this camera can do this and this camera can see that. We hear this all the time.
Yeah.
People talking about how the camera, and fuck the camera. We have this information. We've had it for decades. We've had it for decades. There's nothing new here.
It's crazy to me too. Like when you hear you dig into it and you start to hear like members of Congress and investigators and stuff that have looked at this, or whistleblowers, and they're like, every time you ask to see something, it's like, well, it's too classified. It's too classified for an admiral. So do they tell the president? No, they don't tell the president. Well, then who knows who's in charge? If no one can know any of this, someone has to be in charge, right? Like someone at the top of this. And it makes me wonder to what end is Carl Nell getting on planes and flying around the country and giving talks and doing all this stuff and appearing, and David Grush is doing all this stuff. And I see what you're saying, and I feel confidence that it's probably not going to go too far in our lifetime. But I also have this, like, there's a part of me that is just waiting for the other shoe to drop, because it does feel like there's something is happening now that's different. Like there's just this energy.
I'll give you a story that happened to me, not related to UFOs, but I will make it apply in the same context. This happened to me when I first started my business many, many years ago. Okay. I was obviously not doing, we didn't achieve much at the very beginnings. When you start, you're small, you're working all the time. I'm still working all the time, but working all the time for smaller numbers. Okay. And I'll never forget, I had a really interesting opportunity. I was working with a bank, I had my account in one of the Canadian banks. And I remember I had an opportunity. I had signed the contract with the client. They signed the PO with me. I had it. I needed $75,000 so that I could make, I remember I was going to make close to $300,000. I remember that so clearly that it was like, oh my God, this is it. This is finally, I get a break, like I could do something. And I needed the bank to loan me the $75,000 so that I could make this 300. I had the client, I had the contract, I had the produce, I had everything I needed. And I had a good credit. I was a good customer. I called the bank. I sent them everything. They said, this is great. They finally called me back a week later and said, and I may God strike me dead, I'm not lying when I say this, if we give you that money, you will make too much money. So unfortunately, we will not lend you the $75,000.
The bank told you this?
The bank told me that. I still have the email from that. I still have it.
You'll make too much if we loan it to you, so we'd rather not.
The reason why I bring this up is that taught me a huge lesson back then. No matter what Grush is saying, no matter what anyone out there is saying, there's always going to be someone that we don't know who it is. They don't go on camera. They're not popular. They don't need to be. That is going to say, no, we're not putting this out there, period. They have more authority. They have more power. They have executive power. They have more power than the president of the United States. And if anybody wants to question that, go find out on your own. They have more power than the president.
That is so hard for me. I have a hard time with that because I feel like, I don't disagree with you, by the way. It's in my head. It's hard for people to accept. Like, I imagine, I'm not a Trump guy, but I imagine Donald Trump would be like, put me on the fucking plane and let's go. I want to go. I want to see it. And like, what would they do?
Well,
let's go. Let's Air Force One, gas it up. Let's go. We're going to Area 51. I want to walk in there and see it. And when he gets there, I'm the president. You open the door. Like, I don't understand where that, like.
I remember. I think it was. I know that Harry Reid had been to Area 51 a couple of times. I know that Christopher Mellon has been to Area 51. I know people. I've spoken to people that worked at Area 51. I know people who've been to Area 51. You can go to, I'll even go as far as saying that journalists or potentially soon podcasters, believe it or not, I'm not crazy, I'm not exaggerating, will soon have the ability to be flown out to Groom Lake. Okay? That is
Where they'll just show you a bunch of stuff that's not UFOs.
That's not a big deal. That's
Sure.
not a big deal. If you that's a big deal to get in. I remember I was at a dinner one time sitting next to a woman who her father was a delegate from the government of Argentina. She was sitting next to me, some political person. And
Yeah.
I told her I'm working on a project with Area 51. She says, my father's been there many times. There's very interesting things that happen there. I'm like, and so we started talking, and he's from Argentina. So now they'll bring you to Groom Lake. You land there. It's a giant, it's a pretty big facility.
And half of it's underground, or probably three times bigger underground than what you'd see.
It's Area 51 is fucking gigantic.
You don't think though that if Trump got on Air Force One and went out there and was like, show it to me, I know it's here, I want to see it, like, and he brought like, I don't know, I would 50 Marines with him.
What I would love to see, honestly, what I would love to see is anybody that is truly questioning this at a congressional hearing or publicly saying, why don't we just put this to rest? If there is apparently a facility down there, okay, why don't we go out there? We don't have to be on camera. We don't have to have this recorded. But it's a helicopter ride, probably a 3 to 4 minute helicopter ride. That's really not that far.
Yeah.
So you land at Groom Lake and you get escorted and you go look. You go poke around. Is there anything out here?
It just seems like such a goofy way of like going about this, because it's like you see these members of Congress and they're like, well, we asked so-and-so and they told us no. Or, it's Arrow. Well, we asked everybody in the government and they all said no, so there's obviously nothing to see here. And it's like, well, can we just go and look?
It's interesting because when we take a look at budgets or government approvals of new regulations and laws, there's so much red tape, dude, that it probably took 8 years to get one thing passed. We don't realize it because we're not really paying that much attention, right? But it takes forever for lawyers and people that you got to have congressional representatives, and you have all sorts of people that are on massive payrolls. They have to work hard to get one thing passed, right? So it's not difficult when you turn around and you say, hey, this has nothing to do with a small clerical change in a law. This has to do with national security, and you are not on the need to know. That's all they got to say, and that's it. It's over. It's over. There's nothing else they got to do.
It's wasn't it? I just saw Matt Ford said something that it was Mitch McConnell was the one who shot down the
that's right.
UAP Disclosure Act. This guy's a dinosaur. He doesn't even know where he is half the time.
That's right.
We got video of him standing around just lost and confused in mid-sentence. And this is the man that is making decisions on whether or not the world that your children grow up in is going to be one that has free energy or not.
So it just proves that you can have a lot of well-intentioned people, all of us. We're not asking to know everything, obviously. We're responsible. We recognize that certain things are secret for whatever reason. I think that it would be illogical to say that there's nothing. I think there's enough evidence today, whether it be circumstantial evidence all the way to actual factual evidence, that demonstrates that there is something. To absolutely deny this is insane. So they should at least say there's something. We're not even there yet. Imagine, we're not even there yet.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So at least say there's something. Even NASA, when NASA was,
just say we have an undisclosed number of craft. We've got them. And like, what is China already knows that. Russia already knows that.
They know. Of course they know.
Most of these countries already know that. Yeah. I think they feel like the national security thing and the military mindset controls so much of the thinking that happens in our world. It's this constant security first mindset. And it's like, I get it. I do get it. And I'm not like against the idea of being able to develop our defense capabilities and technology. I think all of that stuff is extremely important, but it's also like at sooner or later, we have to, as a society, we have to accept that the military mind is not the one that should be making all of the decisions all the time. And they shouldn't get first crack at what we get to do or on everything. And it seems like in this country, we hero worship the military so much. And we're just like, they can do no wrong. We just keep shoveling money. And it's like, we need to really rein these people in and pull back on these purse strings and figure out, where is this stuff going? We need to pass an audit before we're going to fund any more black projects. We don't know what these SAPs are costing us. We don't know what they're doing. If we can never get our hands on the technology, we can't use it in our day-to-day lives to improve our world. It's like, well, then what are we doing? That's the thing I have trouble with. It's like 75 years of reverse engineering program. And it's like, well, where's the beef? Where do we, does the rubber ever meet the road here? Do we get flying cars or what?
Yeah, well, and something that we should never forget, and I say this with the utmost amount of cap, when you put everything in cap and you bold it and you make it in red and send it in an email so that it's clear.
The angry email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is all about contractors. This is private industry. This has nothing to do with the government. This is private industry. So there is such a huge component here that has nothing to do with the government. And it's very important that we always remember that part, is that private industry is by far a lot more implicated in this than government. Something that was said in an interview once by Hal Puthoff himself. He said when he left the government, his security clearance actually went higher.
I believe that.
Okay?
I believe that.
And the reason why that happened is because once you are now outside of the purview of the government's conditions, because you have an obligation to the people, you now have access to things that you don't actually have to obey certain constitutional demands of the people.
And you're so right about the court, the labyrinth of legal agreements and weirdness. Like if the government spent taxpayer money to recover a craft and then chopped that craft up into pieces and gave it out to different companies,
right,
without no bid contracts,
right?
Hi, Dick Cheney, no bid contracts on all this stuff. They go on to make billions, trillions of dollars, depending on how long you look at the timeline. Right. And then the question is, what happens when they take their own profits and they just invest that back into reverse engineering the craft? They're not taking taxpayer money anymore. Now it's just it's all in-house.
That's right. Exactly.
Now, do you go back and say that the 30 years of progress and patents that you have now on all that material, that's invalid because you shouldn't have had that material to begin with?
Right. Now, how do you make all that go away?
How
do you walk that? Now, and adding to that, because that's absolutely true what you just said there. Adding to that is just imagine, okay? You and I, we're on a hike somewhere, and suddenly we end up being the same. We end up seeing the exact same thing that hiker with those kids saw in 1947 when they actually found the pod with the bodies of the Roswell crash. You and I are by ourselves. We don't even have our phones with us because your wife said, just bring your GPS watch, and you forgot your phone. No phone for you, no stress for you. You just got to go and have fun with Luigi. Go for a hike.
And that's the day.
We have we have our water, we got our little snacks, and we're out, and we find that, and we find the ultimate thing in the world. Are you really gonna tell people? Think about it for a second. Like really, really, like we hold something in our hand and we go, holy shit, did you see this?
And what would you tell them? What could you tell them?
The thing is, how many people would actually give that away? Think about it. I mean, if you were a company sitting on the most valuable thing ever. Yeah, you now have it. Nobody knows you have it.
I think that's what's so weird, though. Like the footprint of these programs must be massive. I mean, it's not 25 guys in a room that we can't see. It's 10,000 people all working on projects, bits and pieces. There's pilots involved. There's people driving trucks. They got to move these UFOs around. They have to put them on a crane. They've got to
plumbers. I mean, I actually said that one time when I was building four. You know, I was like, they had washrooms, they had a cafeteria, they had a sink, they had multiple sinks in the washroom, they had toilet bowls. I mean, there has to be a piping, like a
remember the movie Clerks where they're talking about the Death Star?
Yeah.
And he's like, those were private contractors. Those guys were general contractors. There was like sighting guys and roofing guys. They killed all those people. I have to change gears here, Luigi. I'm so sorry, but we have been cooking for an hour and a half, and I want to get to viewer questions.
Right.
Are you okay with if we change gears?
Yeah.
Okay, we have some viewer questions. Xander, do you want to do viewer questions, or do you want me to read them? You have them up on
to talk like.
Let's do it
to actual humans.
Let's do it, man.
Oh wow. Okay. All right. Well. Okay. All right.
Take the first one. I'll take the next.
I'll take the first. Yeah. So we asked the Discord to ask us some questions that we could give to you. So we had a question from Lee Gaddis, and he said, did anybody carry on the work that John Mack started, and is there an equivalent John Mack these days? Because I know you worked, you knew John Mack, right?
No, I didn't know. I never met John Mack. John Mack died in 2004. I was able to speak to Randall Nickerson, who knew John Mack very well, but I never had the honor to have met and talked to John Mack. I will say that there are people that have continued to do the work. At the time, there was John Mack was involved in researching abductions. There was also Bud Hopkins at the time that was very well known in the abduction field, who also has passed away. I worked 2 years with David Jacobs, who is still alive but not active anymore, if I'm correct. He's had a tremendous career in this, written many books on the phenomenon. In regards to the aerial children, there hasn't really been any active, not that I know of. I do know some of the witnesses. They don't really make it a part of their life as much anymore. It's not something that they're going on with their lives, and it was certainly something that happened to them, and some of them are still struggling at times. And if you talk about it with some of them, it still brings up a lot of emotions and a lot of difficulty. But there's not that I know of, there is no active work being done on the aerial witnesses today.
Are you familiar with any work being done on abductions today? Period.
Oh, absolutely. There's great. I believe her name is Yvonne Smith. If I say this wrong, I apologize. She's somebody that I met and has done quite a bit of work in the research in the abduction field. There's my God, her name Barbara Lamb is still. I don't know if Barbara Lamb is still active. Last time I saw her, she was. So she's quite involved. I know that Kathleen Marden, which is the the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, the couple that were abducted in the 60s. I know that Kathleen was heading, if I'm not wrong, Kathleen was heading that part of the field at MUFON. So I don't know if she's still doing that. I haven't looked into it in a few last couple of years, so I wouldn't be able to say if that's the case. But and I know there's a lot of other people that are actively working in that field.
What's your personal view of the abduction phenomenon? Because you did mention David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins, John Mack. Those books, I have all of their books here. They are
amazing,
terrifying. They're yes, and sometimes, and not all the stories are terrifying. I want to be clear. Some people will jump on me, but some of the stories are crazy. What's your take?
Abductions are real. They are 100% not the figment of people's imagination. There are a lot of cases that I don't believe in. I think there's a lot of things that people want to be part of this abduction phenomenon, and they're a little delusional in some cases. I mean, I worked in the field for a while, so I'm familiar with.
Can you give an example of something that you're thinking of when you say that?
Look, I mean, there's a lot of people that'll say, no, they're wonderful, they're spirit beings, they'll talk to me, they send me beautiful energy. You know, it's a little bit, you know, it's a little far away from the true abduction cases that I've personally investigated or researched during the time that I was very active in it. I was personally trained by David Jacobs for almost 2 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, I really spent a lot of time with David. David actually came here to Montreal, spent time with him here. I spent a lot of time with him out at his home.
I've lost a lot of sleep after reading David Jacobs' books. I stayed awake at night.
I mean,
literally, like that's scary.
That man really opened my eyes in a few things that I had not. We never always got along on some of the theories, and we were very honest with each other in some of the understanding of things. But I will say that some of the things he had said to me back then that I wasn't agreeing with, I eventually kind of started siding with him over time. He's you know, older than I was, or he's older than I am. I guess it took a little bit of while for me to learn more into this and to get to a point where I realized, yeah, maybe this is not always a good thing. And
Yeah.
the abduction phenomenon, in my opinion, has evolved a lot over the decades. So it's not the same. If you're talking about abductions back in the 60s, they were certainly different than the abductions during the 1980s and the 90s. And from what I heard recently, they've changed a little bit. So is it because the programs have changed? The reason why I say this, the reason why I use that word is because there are what we believe to have been alien programs, meaning they're abducting people for a specific reason. So we're only going on evidence of witness accounts. There's absolutely nothing to validate a real alien abduction. We don't have evidence of that, no matter how many scars or scoop marks or loss or sudden abortions of children or
implants. Do you think there's anything there with implants?
I will say that I do believe that there is something there with implants. I know that there was a lot of work done in the past, and I do believe that people did have implants. I also think that some of the implants are organic or they're biological, so it's a very difficult thing for us as a species to fully comprehend. We're technologically not there yet. So I do think there's a lot to it. I think it's real, but I think we have to be very cautious as well. One of the things that I'm very overly cautious with people about is if somebody thinks they got abducted, the first thing people will say is, "Oh, you should get a hypnotic regression right away." You know, they immediately jump on get hypnotized right away. That is probably the worst piece of advice you can give somebody who got abducted. It probably the ultimate worst thing. You can cause that person to go into a spiraling depression and commit suicide. So you have to be very careful about that. And this is something that I say this with a tremendous amount of caution, because a lot of people are new to this and they read about the fact that, you know, there was hypnotic regressions done when they read about abductions. So they think that that's the first thing that somebody should go through. And
You got to go listen to some of those tapes, though. Like, to hear, people are terrified. It sounds like they're going to have a heart attack right there on the couch.
Absolutely, and I'm 100%. I've been there. I've worked with people who've been abducted and been terrified, completely frozen, paralyzed, terrified, to the point where it got them into a deeper depression. It messed up their marriages. They were never the same person. So you have to be very cautious on how much do you really think it's worth going back into the memory and finding out more. Are you ready for that? And are you ready for what it could do to your life?
Right.
Not personally, but your family life.
Well,
you know.
Did you follow Carla Turner's work at all? Was that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
She talked a lot about the effect on her life and her family and what happened. And it was just really destructive to the.
That's right.
To the peace and calm and quality of life. Do you?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes,
with regard to David Jacobs, just because he is he's a very polarizing figure in the community, and he had his message is so terrifying. Do you feel like he is onto something there?
Absolutely, no question about it.
For those who don't know at home, and for those who are kind of new to the community, David Jacobs, well, I should say Bud Hopkins was probably he's most well known for discussing the abductions in the role of the hybrid breeding program.
That's right.
He theorized that they were taking genetic samples from humans and then using them to cross with
humans,
non-humans, and create a hybrid. Yeah. And David Jacobs took that a step farther, and he was able to, through all of his research, put together a picture of kind of what this program was trying to do, what the end game was.
That's right.
What can you summarize for people at home what that was?
Well, David had come across a lot of cases. This was over a period of 4 decades, so this was not done in a short span of time. That people were taken aboard some type of ship, or they were in some type of environment that didn't look like a normal environment that we would be accustomed to, and they were looking at a screen, and they were being asked to look at the screen and to see what was playing on the screen, like a television screen. And it would be a family. It would be a normal family, man, woman with kids running around. And the aliens, or whoever they were, would say, "Do you see a difference between us and you?" And the person would be in a daze going, "No. You see, soon we will all be one. Soon we will all be together." And this is not something that happened once. This is not one case. This was a multitude of cases, people who did not know each other. Obviously, the details of the abduction were different, but the primary message was that.
And pre-internet, this is important for people.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Like for young people who grew up with the internet, there was no internet. There's no way these people could have connected.
That's right. That's so important to always repeat, is that, you know, this is a phenomenon that was happening in a time where even at the, you know, there was no information about this. Talking about this was so taboo. And it's still taboo today. Imagine then.
It was instant career suicide.
Absolutely. It was career suicide. It was relationship suicide. If you had, your life you would be alienated by the majority of the people who knew you. You were considered crazy completely.
And not in the way that, like, today we have such a forgiving atmosphere. I think much more so about mental health, and people understand everybody's got mental health struggles, and we all deal with it in our own way. But back then it was like, if you were, again, and that's because there's an internet now and we can share and talk and read each other's stories and connect in different ways. But back then, yeah, if you got called crazy and this guy's a UFO nut. Yeah. Oh man. Well, I don't want him flying my plane. I don't want that guy anywhere near my medical, situation. Sure.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jacobs was saying in his work that there's this, they're creating perfect hybrids that look every bit. And I think the most terrifying part about it was he said that these hybrids have the ability to influence us from a distance telepathically, but we don't know who they are. We can't spot them.
It's so interesting because in his one of the books that I recommend is The Threat from David.
Got it.
The Threat from David Jacobs. I recommend that book for anybody who's interested in reading about alien hybrid programs. And then following that, he wrote a book called Among Us, which was a book that followed, which had to do with the integration of a hybrid species in humanity, which is a extremely controversial topic, by the way. This is not normal conversation when you go out with your friends and you start talking. Already, if we're going to talk about nuts and bolts of flying saucers in a hangar, that's already a leap. But as soon as you get into Jacob's work, it really goes too far for a lot of people. But he had names for them. So there was hybrids, which was alien DNA mixed with human DNA. And then there was hybrids, which was hybrid DNA with human DNA. So, and he says those were indistinguishable from us. And the only difference was neurological. So there was simply a neurological component to that species that made them different than a standard human. Now, I know this is a lot for people. Some people might be watching this going, what the hell are we talking about? This is a very respected individual who spent decades of his life researching this. He has a PhD. He's extremely intelligent. He's done a lot of work. He's very, very methodical, very careful. I spent time with David, got to know him. Truly feel that he had a very scientific approach. He never crossed into areas where he was assuming things or basically felt that, oh, maybe it's just that. No, he was very specific. So he was very data driven. When I was at his house one time, this is something that I'll never forget. He brought me down to his basement. This is back when he had it. Bud Hopkins had passed away, and in his house, he had a lot of Bud Hopkins paintings because Bud Hopkins was an artist. So he had a lot of the originals on the wall, and he brought me in the basement. His basement was pretty big, and all of Bud's work was there. He had inherited all of Bud Hopkins' work. So I was in this room. It had, files and filing cabinets and tapes everywhere.
That's so cool.
All of Bud Hopkins' work, which was donated to the Philadelphia academic. I think it's the University of Philadelphia who has this, or something like that. Is now in the holder of all of Bud Hopkins' abduction work. But anyway, all this to say, David was very, very meticulous and very precise and very careful in not overstating things. So
he would even, to your point, there's a great interview he did with Richard Dolan, which everyone should watch. If you watch an interview with David Jacobs, I think the thing that leaps out at me is that he is the first person to tell you, I don't want any of this to be true.
That's right.
I have a hard time saying it out loud because it sounds ridiculous.
That's right.
That's how he opens. Then it's like,
yeah. I'll never forget it. He one of the things David Jacobs told me, which I'll always remember, he says, Luigi, whenever you meet somebody who has potentially had an abduction and they ask you, they tell you they want to get hypnotized, I want you to convince them not to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because of just the trauma.
Yeah. He says, I want you to work as hard as you can to convince them not to do it. He says, it'll be better for them. Trust me. He would say
it's the fringe of the fringe. Even within the UFO community, abductions are the fringe. Yeah. And then when you mention David Jacobs, people don't know what to do with him. They really
I know.
Okay, I have got to move on. I'm so sorry. I want to stay on this, but we just don't have the time. The next question is, this is from Berkough, Berkough, asks, having been the youngest member of MUFON and being involved in the UFO community for such a long time now, what are your thoughts on official disclosure? Well, I feel like we've kind of covered that. Do you think it's proceeding according to plan, or has public interest helped to move the process along much more quickly? And then it says, rephrase, to what degree do you think public interest is playing a role? I feel like we covered that. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I think we've covered it. I think the only thing I would say is public interest is playing a role, because public interest is is giving them the ratings needed to continue with some of this this public discourse. So if the ratings weren't there, you wouldn't be hearing about it as much. So public is helping. Yeah.
And that pressure, that discourse creates political pressure. Sure.
Yeah.
Demon King asks, what do you think something is coming in 2027? And if so, what do you think it is? Have you heard these rumors?
I've heard a lot of rumors. I heard it was 2026. Some people are saying 2027. I lived through the year 2000 and 2012. Nothing happened in 2000 when they said all computers would crash.
Y2K.
And apparently the Aztecs were completely wrong in 2012. So I don't buy into anything that is about to happen 3 or 4 years from now. Unfortunately, I'm not sold on that.
But it is weird, isn't it, that David Jacobs talks, he's like, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to their whatever this is. There's
absolutely, yeah.
And there's almost like a timeline that he's like, the hybrids just kept getting better until eventually they stopped looking alien at all. They just looked
They look like humans. Yeah.
So this plan is whatever it is progressing, and it's at a new phase. It's interesting that
it is interesting, but whatever would happen, I don't know.
Okay, Brett Higgins asks, oh, this is a good one. Are you, well, first, let me set this up. Are you familiar with Dan Burrish?
Yes.
Or Dan Crane? Have you, will you be doing anything with that story? What do you think of that story? Do you have any thoughts on it?
I think it's a very interesting story. I know I'm familiar with it. I have a person who I think his name is Brian Jackson, if I'm not wrong, who's you've actually had on your show, I believe, talking about Dan Burrish.
Brian Jackson. Yeah. I just spoke with Brian yesterday. Yeah.
Very, very cool guy. Does very good work. He's brought me up to speed on Dan Burrish. I think that it's interesting. We're not obviously including it in Project Gravitar because it doesn't have any relevance to the Bob Lazar story per se. Like Bob had no communications or anything like that. So we're not going to cover it. But I do hope that there's more attention placed on this person to see if there's anybody really interested in doing a further deep dive investigation on him, on his background. If somebody does talk about it, why not go a little bit further? It certainly seems like he's somebody who has some academic background in all this. So it's interesting. I'm not going to just put it aside, but there's just not anything there that I could put in the film.
Have you, just out of curiosity, have you seen the illustrations that Mark McCandlish did of Dan's description of what he saw inside area?
Yes, I did. Yes, I have. Actually, somebody sent that to me a few months ago. Yeah, it was really interesting. I actually even showed them to Bob. I mean, Bob was
That's what I want. I want to know what Bob thinks about those. What
Bob said, look, he goes, none of that rank does any. He says, look, anything is possible because he says, I did not see that. He says, all I saw was what I show you. He says the facility was quite big. I did not have permission to go in many different places in there. So he says, I'm sure there's a lot more to this than I even got to see.
It's like the size of a city.
Yeah.
And he saw one block.
Saw a little tiny part of it. And that's it. He says, I can't go beyond that.
Okay. Brian Jackson asks, Hi, Brian. Bottom line, what is the release date for the documentary, the VR experience, the model, the book? When can we see all this?
So we're doing the final edit of the movie. So you guys got to know that we're honest. We're really working hard to get the edit done. It's going to be probably ready for market in November, but that doesn't mean it's out to the public in November. Okay. So super important. It'll probably be ready in November. Not sure if you guys get to see it in November. My goal is for you guys to all see it as soon as I get it ready. So it'll depend on a few things. One of them is potential distribution that we're working out, the kinks. So that's being worked on like you have no idea. In regards to the VR experience, that'll be mid 2025. Okay, so that is
2025.
that'll follow the movie, and it will be potentially about 4 to 6 months after the launch of the movie. That's kind of like the time frame. The book will probably follow very much close to the same time of the VR.
Got it.
Yeah.
And you said before we went live that there's possibility that this will be bundled in some way, so people
Exactly. There's a very big possibility that we're working on a bundle. There's still a lot of things that I have to work out. It's financial, it's legal, it's all sorts of little things, but we're working things out. Yeah.
And in the future, is there a chance of that Bob action figure? Do we think we might see that?
Well, I was gonna. This is a perfect time for us to show like some of the stuff that we're making. This is, we're not making a Bob Lazar yet, but this is a real perfect recreation of the little seats that were inside the craft. So we're gonna have these. These are gonna be collectors, and we're gonna have these done. We're also gonna have replicas of the other crafts that were at S4. This is. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Bob Lazar story. This is the famous Jello mold craft. Okay, and it does look like like a cake mold or a Jello mold. And this is something that was witnessed by Bob. Now, are we going to make a Bob Lazar action figure? Not sure about an action figure, but I'll give you a really cool one. We might make a bobblehead.
I want one. I will buy it today. Let me pre-order. Yes. So X Chaser wants to know. I am digging the sweater that Luigi has. Can we buy it? Your sweater looks awesome.
This is G-Star. I've had this for years. It's not even. Yeah, I don't know where you could find this.
It's not the official Area 51.
It gives me vibes of the second Back to the Future movie with Michael J. Fox wearing that really long sleeve oversized.
That's right. I didn't even think of that.
The self-drying jacket.
Yeah. I actually have a picture of Bob wearing that jacket. Yeah.
This is going to be such a groundbreaking project. The scope is so spectacular and the level of detail is so exciting. I cannot wait to see it. Will you be teasing any footage or any VFX stuff from the experience between now and release?
Oh, absolutely. I would highly recommend everyone follow us. This is just so that also talking a little bit about our public positioning. We have been very quiet at Project Gravitar now for a few months. So that's about to change a lot. Okay, so I highly recommend you follow us on our Instagram under Project Gravitar and also subscribe to our YouTube under Project Gravitar because there is a lot that is about to come out. So you certainly going to want to check that out.
And we will, of course, invite you back as soon as you have more to share. And I would love to deeper dive into some of the footage and the VFX and really get into the technical. It is so cool what you have done. Luigi, we are out of time for today, but this has been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for sitting down and walking us through it.
Thank you, guys. You guys are great. I appreciate it.
Is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up for today?
I think we did a great. I think it was great. I mean, I just follow us. I will certainly be back, and I can't wait to maybe be back with some insane footage to show you guys because there's some stuff I think the people are going to want to see.
People are going to want to see it. I am super excited. Well, we will keep everybody in the loop. As soon as you have more to share, please let me know, and we'll circle back. But Luigi, it's been great. I'm going to let you get back to your day. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for watching, for participating in the chat. If you go to Project Gravitar on YouTube or Instagram, follow them there. Is there a mailing list on the website they can go on to?
Yes, they can also subscribe to our mailing list on our website, projectgravitar.com. Yeah, absolutely.
Outstanding. Well, I guess we'll leave it there, and we'll circle back when there's more to share.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Luigi. Thanks to everyone for watching. Don't forget to like and share this video, please. It really does help. It's a heavy lift to build this channel and to bring in guests like Luigi. It is not an easy thing, so we need all the help we can get. I really do appreciate it. You guys are fantastic. Thank you for all the support. The subscriptions in the last few days have been blowing up. You guys are going into the Discord. We've got a great community here. We want to keep that going and just watch it grow. So thanks to everyone for being a part of this. We'll see you on the next one. Until then, keep looking up.